So, project planning. Let's assume you've been given the go-ahead to define your project, to work out exactly what it is that you're going to do, how much it's going to cost, in order that people can genuinely now take the big decision, do we do this project or don't we do this project? In order to do that, you've got to do some work. You've actually got to do some fairly detailed research and analysis and planning. So to take us through that process, as it is one of the most important elements we have, I'm going to give you a really simple, in my book anyway, a really simple model to follow, which will allow you to work through each of the areas that we need to work through in order to create the end result, which is our project plan. If you don't spend enough time here, too little in planning, what does it mean? Well, you're going to end up spending an awful lot of time chasing your tail, correcting mistakes, or renegotiating. So better to spend a little bit more time now to make your project run a lot smoother when you're running it live. So let's have a look at project definition then. The first step, let us be absolutely clear about the purpose and objectives that are there for your project. What is required? What are the outcomes that are required from this project? As a project manager, our role is to deliver a project, in Prince 2 terms, that is capable of achieving the results that are required. So we need to be quite clear what those results are. So let's make sure we have those outcomes defined properly in the first place. Once we're clear about our outcomes and our objectives, the next stage is to think about any of the concerns that we might have. What projects have been done like this before? Were there any risks? Are there any dangers, issues, difficulties? Anything that we might predict could go wrong, we should think of right now. We should then think about whether there's any way in which we can avoid any of those risks. Some of the risks, of course, might be that we're too successful. Maybe that's not a problem, but if you are, how will you handle it? So we need to analyse what the risks are and then decide how we're going to manage those situations. Maybe if it's a difficult problem of a risk, maybe you do something in a different way so you avoid it altogether. That would be ideal. A lot of different options there, but really carry out a thorough risk analysis and risk management process before you go anywhere else. And then throughout the whole of this planning phase, keep coming back to risk. It's a cyclical process. We should never leave risk alone. We should constantly have it in our minds and be aware of it. So when we've identified those risks, we also need to have some strategies, some clear plans, ways in which we think about things. So what's your strategy for dealing with quality? Are there any standards you have to comply with? Who will take responsibility for it? How do you link your quality standards with those of any of your suppliers? How will you communicate them? How will checks or tests be decided? Let's get the general principles clear about quality. For configuration, configuration is about which components, which version number, what security. How much control do you need to have about each of those component products and the final deliverable, the final output of your project? How will you keep track of version numbers? What are your basic systems and procedures that you have? Those need to be quite clear before you begin. What about communication? Who needs to know what? When do they need to know it? What external people, what internal people, what format of communication, what frequency, what's perhaps confidential, what's not confidential. So a communication plan is necessary too. All of these things can be clearly defined at the beginning. So now we get into some of the techniques, and the first of those techniques is product-based planning. We will do a further video explaining this in more detail later on in the series, but for now this is just a high-level view. Product-based planning allows us to take the overall project output and break it down into its component parts. So if we were to be thinking of a training room, let's say, that consists of several component parts: desks or tables, chairs, flip charts, pens, maybe blinds, overhead projector, screens, maybe a sound system. All of those are component parts. And if you were designing and creating a training room as your project, each one of those should be clearly identified to the lowest logical level of detail. I mean, you probably wouldn't go to what sort of glue the carpet company are going to use to lay the carpet, but you would still want to put a specification in for the carpet quite clearly. When you know what your component products are, then you put specifications in. What is its purpose? What quality standards is required? Is this carpet intended to last 2 years or 20 years? People need to know what it's there for. What is it derived from? Are there certain colour schemes that we have to comply with? Must it be in purple or must it be in brown? So there are some things that are in place before we can decide what the specification is, and certainly what some of the presentation of that would look like. In our project, we break these down into products, and these products have these specifications. So we're now quite clear, where does it come from and what quality standard is there? We should identify who might be responsible for its creation, who would be responsible for carrying out the quality checks or tests. What are those checks or tests going to be? What does it depend upon? Are there these things like these derivations? What is it constituted by? I mean, how does it break down any further? If we do a proper description of these components, it's really easy then when we come to later on produce the financials for us to say how many resources, how much time, and how much cost for each of these component products. Your overall project schedule and plans are much easier product by product. So we've now got a specification for each of these products. That means that we can put them into a logical sequence. No times attached just yet, but just logically, what order should they be done in? And can we be doing some in parallel? How many parallel flows can we realistically have based on the resources we've got? So that's called a product flow diagram. That's all put in place so we get a feel for how the project will flow from start to finish. Against each of these products, as we said, we will have a responsibility. Which company, which organisation, which individual. That then gets translated into a responsibility matrix where we show who is responsible for what. Are they responsible for providing the input or for approving it? Are they responsible for producing it or carrying out a quality check? All of these things become clear, agreed, and then communicated. Everybody knows where they stand. We can now start to pull together the timescales. Each of these suppliers or team members has said how long each product will take to complete. We add that to a schedule. We'll produce a Gantt chart. Henry Gantt did a marvellous job when he worked on the Hoover Dam and turned his bar chart sideways, and we've all used something similar ever since. So the Gantt chart will show us where it will start and finish. It should show us any slack time, always at the end, never at the beginning, of course. We want the spare time after we've finished it, not before. So we produce our Gantt chart. We think about what our milestones might be at that point as well. From there, we start to add in any other details. So we're going to build into this the proper schedule. We're going to build in the costs. We're going to build in resource requirements. Continue to think about risk. There may be more actions we have to take which take time, which take energy, effort, money. Add all of that in, and finally we can pull all that together into our project plan. That project plan goes to the senior managers. It will show what the benefits are, what the costs are, how many risks there are, how we plan to do it, who we plan to involve, how we're going to measure its success, and finally how much it's going to cost, which should give us a good balance that then says, if the project is worth all these benefits, it's going to cost this, is this project viable? Do we carry on or do we not? And that's the whole point of doing project definition, to create that business case to give us enough information to make the viability decision. It's the one area we cannot afford to miss. Please don't ever not plan your project. Use these tools and techniques, keep it all simple, and you'll get good decisions, and you'll start projects when it's right to start them and not if it's wrong. More information will be available in other videos, particularly looking at some of these things. For example, the product breakdown structure and product flow diagram, risk analysis and risk management. But for now, planning is everything.